Welcome to Business Talk on Business Tech, South Africa's largest business news website. And we're talking about the impact of COVID on banking. Now, Standard Bank, Africa's largest lender by assets, took a more than 20 billion rand hit on credit impairments in 2020, but encouragingly flagged a more than 40% rise in its headline earnings per share in the interim period recently, and reported what it called significantly lower bad debt charges and forward-looking provisions, painting a far rosier picture for the economy as the size of the reserves set aside by banks certainly linked to their growth forecasts. Well, to talk about what we're seeing in the business end of banking as the country looks set to shake off the economic gloom of 2020, I'm joined by Simone Cooper, Head of Business Banking at Standard Bank. Simone, thanks for joining us. You've been with the bank for most of your career. How did you come to head up the business banking division of Africa's largest lender?
Well, thanks very much for having me on the show. I'm very excited to be here. I think I've always been in the business banking environment. I started my career in the business environment, very interested in small businesses and how we can really help support and grow small businesses. So I think through a passion for the area and the sector, as well as just, I suppose, most of my career being involved in it, I've managed to look, or very lucky now to look after it. And it's unfortunate in COVID times, but I'm very excited to be actually seeing how we can help businesses to get through this time.
Absolutely. And framing it exactly like that. Very difficult for small businesses. We know they've been outsizedly impacted by the pandemic. Larger businesses with perhaps deeper pockets, bigger balance sheets have been able to ride through the storm. It's the small businesses that have really struggled. If you look around your community, the mom and pops, but in that lies the opportunity. What are some of the most common requests that you're currently getting from businesses in 2021 as we really try to move on from the pandemic? Are you seeing perhaps a change in business types from brick and mortar to more digital? What sort of business are you seeing?
Definitely a move to more digital. I think that small businesses are generally serving the consumers of South Africa, and with people not wanting to necessarily go to the shops or to always engage from a physical perspective, there certainly is this move towards digital. So a lot of businesses asking questions around, how do I create a website? How do I think about not only creating this website and this potentially an online store, but how do I also now get my goods and services to the end consumer? So initially, I think everyone had this rush to say, how do I just actually get an online store? But now very much the move is around, okay, I've now got an online store. How do I actually get my product or service to the ultimate consumer? And added to that, how do I also think about online marketing? So Google, Instagram, what are the social media options for me?
And it's interesting that, because what you're talking about is a level of digital maturity that we're starting to see in many small and medium-sized enterprises, which is really encouraging. And I think it is the one big trend or theme that we saw emerge from the pandemic, the acceleration of digital. And I know the bank has launched a very exciting partnership with the likes of Google and MasterCard, just to help small businesses gain traction in this online world, which can often seem like it's overwhelming, because as you rightly point out, it's more than just having a website. It's now getting your goods or services to market. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
So what the Google MasterCard piece that you're referring to was specifically around Simply Blue, which is I suppose an e-commerce product that we have, where it helps businesses to actually put their business online. And that partnership that you're referring to was to help them with the Google AdWords and to really get their name out there. So when people are searching on Google, they're getting top of mind from consumers. So I think that's a big trend. What we're also seeing now is businesses wanting assistance with sort of domain services and how do I get a personalized email address? Because a lot of them have been operating also with Gmail addresses and those sorts of things. So it's around how do you professionalize the online business? And it goes from logistics to all sorts of things. And there's a number of smaller businesses that are actually trying to say, how do they fill this logistics space as well now? And some fintechs coming up trying to fill this gap, because it is a real need. You've got your bigger online stores, which have really, I suppose, mastered this distribution piece. But for a smaller business, it really is a challenge. So that's certainly the trends that we're starting to see, and some of the things that are coming through.
And within that, business opportunities. I mean, if you want to help your mom and pop with that last mile, the hardware store down the road, help them reach the people in their community, potentially a small business opportunity for you to consider as well. Within this, in terms of growth, are you seeing an outperformance with those businesses who are embracing digital versus those who've remained wedded in brick and mortar? What sort of picture emerges on that front?
So there definitely is a huge advantage on some of the businesses that have gone digital. In saying that, though, there are still businesses that are operating in the traditional brick and mortar where seemingly the business has come back. So consumers have re-engaged and have come back to that traditional brick and mortar. But definitely there's a huge increase on e-commerce in particular. So there's been a MasterCard study that was released, which indicated that about over the last 2 years, there's been about a 66% increase on online sales. So certainly the businesses that are involved in that sphere of the economy have actually seen massive growth in their businesses, and more so than they had pre the pandemic. So as you rightfully said, there certainly are opportunities, but it is a mixed bag. It really depends on the sector and the industries that certain businesses are involved. Some certainly have not recovered back to the pre-pandemic levels, even if they have taken their businesses online. So it is quite business specific, and just really depends on the market that you're serving.
Yeah, I think above all, what we need in this country is growth. Economic growth, above all else, will start to solve many of the issues, the pain points, the frictions, and the fraying of the social fabric that we do see, be it in employment or in any other area of South African life at the moment. That said, as one of the country's leading lenders, it must have been very difficult for you last year, having to deal with your SME clients and make very tough calls, tough decisions. I know many of the banks provided some kind of relief. How did you manage your SME book last year?
Yeah, so I think what made 2020 particularly difficult was that it was not that we had this booming economy prior to going into the pandemic. So prior to the pandemic, we had load shedding, which we still sit with today, very low growth from a GDP perspective. And so I think a constrained environment, even prior to the stresses and strains of 2020. Obviously, 2020 was an extremely tough year for small businesses. And the approach that we took from a Standard Bank perspective was to see how do we get as many businesses through that tough period as we could. So certainly in April and May of last year, there were only about 30% of businesses that were deemed essential services. So the majority of them were not able to operate at all during that period. And then we did see that turnover levels dropped by as much as 70%. I'm talking on average over that period. They have started to come back, but certainly not to the levels that we've seen prior to the pandemic. But I think our approach, as well as a lot of other lenders in the economy, has been how do we really try and extend the terms of loans in particular as far as possible. Support businesses with online pieces. I spoke about Simply Blue previously, other digital account opening. How do you do things via virtual relationships or over the phone rather than seeing a person or business face to face? So there's been a lot that's been done. I do think that we are starting to see certainly some green shoots coming back into the economy, and businesses have really, I suppose, as we would expect them to, weather the storm quite surprisingly well. Making sure that they watch their costs, watch their expenses, and do what they can to get through this period. But it has been an extremely tough time.
And I suppose entrepreneurs will do what they do during a crisis. If you're an entrepreneur managing a business and all of a sudden it clouds over and you can't see the horizon anymore, and you can't plan, you don't know what your future revenue is going to be because all the previous assumptions have to be thrown out the window. You don't operate through a global pandemic every day. You tend not to go out and take on more debt. You do what you just said. You manage your costs, you manage your overheads, batten down the hatches and see if you can get through. And then if you can start to make more reasonable assumptions about potential future cash flows and revenues, then you can go and start borrowing a little bit more. Is that the kind of behavior that you're seeing? Because I know many of the banks took a bit of flack around the Treasury's loan guarantee scheme, but I personally didn't see entrepreneurs going out there and gearing up their balance sheets when the environment was so uncertain.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with that, and that small businesses and their approach, as you say, batten down the hatches, cut my costs, make sure I can try and make ends meet and do what I need to do to get through this period. The demand for credit was certainly quite muted over the period. It still is. I think businesses are really taking have taken a wait and see approach. And certainly if there is credit required, it's not for massive capital investment. It's probably just a sort of some form of working capital. But what we are starting to see is, as you say, now businesses have started to say, well, this is potentially this new normal that we operate within. And so if I've been operating through the second wave, which was in sort of December, January, February, and now through the sort of 2021, the first half of 2021, I'm getting a better feel for what this new normal looks like. And so, as you say, it's probably a bit easier for businesses to forecast now around what that may look like. So there is a bit of demand coming in the system, but certainly for a lot of 2020, the demand certainly wasn't there and very muted from the business's perspective.
And within that, just give me an insight into what your typical loan size would look like for a small business in South Africa. What sort of check size are we talking about here? What are the usual terms, just to give us a sense of what SMEs are looking for?
Yeah, so surprisingly, it's actually on average is quite small, but it really depends on, there are a lot of variables that will go into it. So it'll depend on the business, whether they need to buy, premises to operate from, or if there's machines to be able to actually manufacture something. So those businesses would typically have a much larger demand for credit. But on average, your small businesses are looking around 50,000, and that's generally on average the sort of small business loan that we would see.
And then just in terms of the composition of small businesses in South Africa, startups versus more mature businesses, maybe family-owned businesses versus the more, shall we call them, technology, fintechy driven businesses, or the mom and pop down the road that I referenced earlier. What sort of spread of small business are you seeing?
From a formal banking sector, I suppose a more established type of business. So we see sort of your mom and pop shops, your one-man shows, who sort of sit in that smaller environment. As you move into the more medium-sized business, and lots of generations within those family businesses working within the entities. And then I think also added to that, we have seen a lot of demand for startup businesses during this period. I think people potentially losing employment or formal employment, and so they're looking towards those types of things. But a lot of those, I suppose, traditionally more corporate people would have been going into trying to get into the sort of franchising environment and those things. So it really is a bit of a mixed bag, but that sort of gives you a sense. And then from a fintech perspective, there are startups coming into that environment, but there's some interesting pieces. Those businesses generally have some backers or interesting people who generally getting them off the ground, but there's certainly a lot of activity happening in that space.
Yeah, that's definitely where your seed funders, your angel investors, and your early stage VC funds might be playing. And often when I speak to fintechs in the past, it's been about this endless beauty parade. Many of them want to come and work with established financial services companies. They go, they meet, it's an endless beauty parade, but they never get invited to the dance. Are you seeing that change? How are you seeing the relationship between the fintechs and the incumbents challenged or changed by the COVID pandemic?
So I think that there's definitely a realization, particularly from your larger businesses, and I suppose realizing that they can't do everything, that it's not necessarily viable for them to do everything, and also potentially we're not always that good at it. So certainly what you're seeing, and particularly from a Standard Bank perspective, we definitely are looking at how do we work much better with fintechs and startup businesses. We see a lot of what they do and what we do as quite complementary. So a lot of them are playing in the logistics space, a lot of them in the alternative lending space, the payments environment, where they can actually probably do something that's quite complementary to our business. So from our perspective, we definitely are looking at how we, I suppose, play much better with the fintechs. And we also have an investment from a Standard Bank perspective into Founders Factory, which is looking at taking equity stakes in startup fintechs and in your smaller fintechs. So it's definitely a space that we see a lot of opportunity in, and one that we're looking to explore further.
So a bit more dancing and a bit less parading when it comes to that analogy I mentioned earlier. And just as we conclude our time together, Simone, I'm sure many entrepreneurs out there watching this will be in different spaces and find themselves in different of those buckets of opportunity or challenges that we mentioned now. What would your advice be to entrepreneurs at this stage in South Africa? I often say it's the hope that kills you, but I'm quite hopeful. If you look at the macro environment, we've had 12 months now of consecutive trade surpluses. The rand, who would have said that the rand would be around 13.50 to the dollar just a year ago? We're probably closer to 19. On the other side, we still got Eskom, we still got load shedding. The economic reforms are moving interminably slowly. So it's this always these inherent tensions in South Africa. What advice would you have to an entrepreneur right now to get their business going and to start taking advantage of some of those opportunities?
I think for a small business, it's really just about understand your customer and your target market and how you can go after them. And I think that that's no different if you're a small business or if you're a big business. But I think small businesses just have to say, where is my market moved to? Where are the opportunities? How do I understand where that customer base is moving to and what they're doing? And if you can do that and you can do that well, I think that will stand you in good stead. And if you can show that you do have this established base and your established business and how you're going to make money is really going to help you. I think the other piece is engaging with a lot of businesses over the past sort of 18 months has been around what has got them through this time is doing the right business the right way, being honest business people and doing, I suppose, treating their customers and their suppliers well through this period. And I think it's that piece around how do you work with the other business community well, and make sure that in times of crisis, people are going to turn towards those businesses that they rely on, people who they think are honest, and business people that are really trying to just do a good, honest day's trade. I think the final piece of advice that I would give to small businesses is, it may seem like you're alone, but you're not. There are lots of businesses out there who are going through the same thing as you are. So try to keep as close as possible to your networks, to other business people, because there are some fantastic stories of how people have reinvented their business, doing something completely different, understanding what new trends are emerging, and really starting to take advantage of that. So that's, I guess, the final piece of advice. And I, like yourself, remain very hopeful that we're starting to see some green shoots in the economy. And I think watch this space. There's going to be some great stuff emerging out of the pandemic.
Well, very happy to hear. I'm not the only one who remains hopeful. It's some fantastic advice, great insights. Thank you very much for sharing them and for your time. Simone Cooper, Head of Business Banking at Standard Bank. Take care.